and electronic devices. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Ms. Wagner, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bates?
Present.
Ms. Bolton?
Present.
Mrs. Copeland-Dansby? Mr. Davis? Mr. Messer?
Present.
Mr. Morosky?
Present.
President Jones?
Here. Thank you. So, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
And welcome to our the first meeting of our Transportation Summit. Just wanted to take a couple minutes to give you just sort of a real broad scope idea of what the purpose of this meeting is. And then I'm going to turn it over to my board colleague, Ms. Bolton, to give a broader overview and some of the history of how we got to this point of feeling like we needed to have this summit. So today's meeting is really an initial conversation between board and administration about what has been defined as systemic challenges with our transportation system. So I am reminded that as we talk more and more about this, we took it to that systemic level because, clearly we understand that this is about more than just the buses. And that's Ms. Bolton's quote. And so today is really just a very basic conversation with some presentations around information related to transportation and how we as a district want to address it from a broad scope level. We had added to the agenda an opportunity for hearing of the public, which we put sort of toward the end because we wanted folks to get the information first, and then if they wanted to comment, they could. But my understanding is that we didn't have any people sign up, so that's okay because you're still going to get the information. So I do want to make a point that this meeting has to end. We can continue having the dialogue, but well, probably not because we're going to lose board members. We plan to end the conversation around 5:15 because we won't have a quorum at that point. So please, board and administration, please, when you're making your points, just make your points. Let's move on quickly so that we can make sure we get all of the material in. So having said that, Ms. Bolton, would you please take on the next topic?
Thank you very much. Yes, there are any number of reasons we are having this summit. The number one reason is not about buses, the number of them or the color of them, or whether it's metro or yellow, or on time or late, or number of routes, or complaints about charters or parochials receiving the same service. It's not about finding ways to help the administration do its job regarding managing the transportation services either. It is about helping the board be able to make very large and perhaps transformative decisions. Over the last decade or so and before, the school boards of Cincinnati have made huge decisions, and we have to make a few ourselves now. They decided some years ago to outsource the transportation system, saved millions of dollars for well over a decade and a half, but it also has created issues. They decided to partner with Metro, and that's been a really important decision. They decided to, at one time, use only one yellow bus vendor. That worked for a while, and then did not work for a while. They chose to offer services to high school students, even though the state does not require it. We chose to provide transportation on a wider radius than the state requires for elementary. We decided to create some sort of dedicated small fleet for our extracurriculars and other sorts of field experiences for our students. Changing the one vendor approved to multiple vendors was another decision. So we've been capable of correcting when the decision that we've made has not been able to fulfill the needs. We've also agreed occasionally to limit stops so that we didn't have the in and out and more mileage, increasing the space that our children had to walk, but at least it was also an important savings. Providing cards for after-school activities so our students could stay. And perhaps the biggest decision that was made of all, and I think it's one of our major first and major decisions regarding equity, we decided that nobody would pay for transportation. Suburbs can't even say that, because we knew that it was impacting our students and their families' ability to get to school. We did not want our families to try to figure out whether or not there would be lunch money or bus money, or whether or not the laundry would be done on the weekend with the quarters, or have to be invested to get on the bus to get to school. It's a huge district, and we have to make huge decisions, and we have to make sure that those decisions actually contribute to the transformative era we're about to enter with our superintendent and treasurer in this board. What we need now is not a matter of management or incremental changes or tweaking, although all of those in a combination should be good and important corrections. What we really need now is to recognize that this district cannot move ahead under the current circumstances of our transportation provision. First and foremost, the transportation line item is unsustainable. Second of all, we have to look in terms of, if we reorganize the district from a program and portfolio angle, we'd have to read into that what kinds of transportation needs there would be as we change. We have to ask ourselves, even if we can afford the number of choices that we provide our families, because it's expensive to have magnets, it's expensive to have neighborhood schools that people may or may not want to walk to or attend. So all of these are interrelated. That's why this summit is a summit and not a meeting and not a special hearing, but instead is a beginning of some major transformative decisions, some of which will come out of the Strategic Planning Committee, but all of them ultimately will have to be decided here. And so that's where we are, and that's where we begin.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Superintendent Mitchell, would you introduce the first presentation?
Absolutely, thank you. I'd like to ask Dr. Gilda Vargas to come to the podium. She is from Children's Hospital Medical Center, and she's going to provide a presentation on some information related to later start times.
I brought some friends. Yes, okay. I'm Gilda Vargas Adams, Dean Beebe, psychologist with me, and Kim Perry, also part of our group of community advocates who are looking to implement appropriate high school start times. I'm going to let Dr. Beebe begin.
The goal of us being here is primarily to make sure that this is kept in mind as what sounds like a potentially major overhaul is put in place. School start time is actually an enormous issue in terms of the health, well-being, learning, physical, emotional, and safety of our kids. What's the scope of the problem? Well, by the time we have high school seniors coming around, 80% of them are getting less than the recommended amount of sleep on a regular basis. And the clicker works. Okay, let's try that. Here we go. So what's happening? Why is that occurring, that teenagers are actually getting less sleep as they get older? The natural timing of sleep is occurring later and later. In fact, late adolescence is the latest point in the entire life cycle during which a person sleeps. It is different. Your adult sleep patterns are different from teenagers. Teenagers are both socially and biologically driven to fall asleep later and to rise later. And yet what we have are schools that start, many of them, well before dawn, biological dawn for these youth. I'm pretty sure that during most of the year, y'all aren't actually at work and having to think before dawn. First bell is quite awful for many of these teenagers. So what are the associations with it? There's tons of large correlational studies with real-world outcomes showing mental health issues, behavior and cognition being associated with short sleep in kids, driving accidents, increased rates of weapons being brought to school and aggression at school, emotion regulation problems at school, learning issues, absenteeism at school, athletic injuries, poor performance. Basically, every metric that you want your teenager to be healthy on is associated with getting inadequate sleep. And it's not just an issue of all kids, it probably is hitting our most vulnerable kids most. So as we think about equity, think about this. We may be actually setting up a barrier with early school start times that impacts our most at-risk kids. Now, the work I've been doing at Children's for the past 2 decades has been more experimental work. It shows these large correlational studies aren't just associations, it's cause and effect. When you experimentally manipulate sleep duration, every one of those metrics, at least insofar as we can measure them in experimental settings, moves. So obesity, that is diet and physical activity, shift with less sleep. Athletic performance shifts with less sleep. Attention and learning shift in whopping ways with less sleep. Mood regulation is one of the first things to go with less sleep. Unsafe driving, we can actually show that kids are worse on the road with less sleep, and risky behaviors. There's a lot of questions out there which frankly have no scientific foundation but for some reason persist. And the major question being, if we start schools later, won't teenagers just fall asleep later and therefore will have done absolutely no good whatsoever with sleep? And the answer unequivocally over and over again is no. There's a nice little study here. This is just one source of things that you can look up yourself, but there's actually a couple dozen different studies that have shown shifts in school start times or matched comparison districts with different school start times, and you have a very linear relationship, a very clear relationship. The later you start school, the more sleep the teenagers get.
So, very quickly, I promised we'd be quick. We know that more sleep benefits students in all of these important ways. Here's a list of some of the organizations that have come out with official position statements supporting high school students starting school at 8:30 or later. I would show you a list of those that are opposed, but there aren't any. Our goals are to get every high school student in CPS showing up at school at 8:30 or later. We know that this will improve their happiness, their health, their families will be better off for it. We'll see fewer risk behaviors, better attendance, fewer dropouts, more graduates, better grades, better test scores, and even increased incomes. I'm going to let Kim talk to you a little bit about how we think we can help solve this problem.
So looking at, like we said, we're looking at transportation holistically. We think that the later starts for high schools could be a significant part of the solution. And like Dr. Beebe said earlier, there's equity in that later starts benefits almost matter more for students with currently experiencing disadvantages. There's the safety issue. I mean, fewer kids going to school in the dark, driving, whatever, waiting for a bus is clearly more safe. Also, there can be choice in this. If there are some schools that are more enthusiastic about later starts, they can adopt that situation more quickly than others. And then the most important part of this, though, is that since we are looking at this holistically, later starts for high schools also supports the community in that we would, and overall improvements for the students, and it would just be one aspect of it so that we could have this opportunity to transform the school day and establish a school day that serves the students and their families better. So it would make it easier for families and community members to engage with the school. And we think there's a big opportunity there, and with later starts being part of that. And the clicker. Thank you. So one of the things that we bring to the table is some synergy with this, and we've already been working with Metro to gather some data. We have about 2 years of data from their automated passenger count system that reveals a lot of the trip and route information, passenger counts, and all that sort of thing that we can use to reveal efficiencies and facilitate the later start. But really, facilitate an overall look at the transportation system. This data covers school and non-school bus service. We can also help with transportation logistics by seeking out improvements, possibly in the routing or seeking opportunities for cost cutting. And then what we're hoping is that a working group can come together, or we can obtain the services of a consultant to address the range of challenges with transportation at the moment.
Thank you. I'm so
Thank-
proud of you.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Bolton,
And
I'm sorry.
I forgot she was passing that out. So that is just a suggestion as to how maybe that working group could come together. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ms.
Now-
Bolton, did you have a comment or question?
I have just a couple of comments. First of all, thank you so much. The board members have before them this rather extensive report that really is about later starts, and it does try to address many of the issues, both pro and con, and it tries to address some of the logistical issues. It also encompasses some of the great engagement work that our own engagement team has done, and as well as the folks that we've contracted to do some engagement. To give you an idea how long all this has been going on and why I'm so proud that they did this as quickly as they did, it was a former Superintendent Ronan that assigned this particular topic to the Student Achievement Committee. And so these folks have basically become sort of our fourth, fifth, and sixth, and seventh, and eighth members of the Student Achievement Committee, and we appreciate it. But we would hope that the board members will take an opportunity to read this report. The second half of it or so is really different views and different substantiation for doing it, as well as some questions about doing it. But also there is a report that we've all sort of approved together, and we have encompassed some of their issues and certainly what student achievement has found. And the recommendations appear in blue in the text. So knowing we don't have any more time for this, and this is an important topic, I would only suggest that we really look into some of their suggestions, and actually they bring to the table some major data that I'm not sure that we've been able to avail ourselves of. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on, Superintendent Mitchell.
All right, thank you. So what I do want to do is just take a couple of moments to walk you through the documents that you have in front of you. So in your folder, you have a set of questions, and it's in the form of a chart, and there are the answers that are provided to those questions. And then you also have packets. These packets are clipped together. These are questions 1 through 13. So we received 2 sets of questions to respond to. So the first set is this chart with the answers on them. And then the other questions involved a lot more detail and information, so we provided packets. The reason I'm going through this with you right now is that our PowerPoint presentation isn't organized exactly the way this information is organized, because we wanted to make it flow very well. Sarah Trimble Oliver, Scott Adams will also be joining me in this presentation. Just for your edification, we do have members of our vendors who are providing bus service, not to answer questions, but they have a sincere interest in what we have to say regarding the transportation situation within CPS. So you can see that we transport roughly 33,000 students, CPS, non-public, and charter. We have 5 vendors, and they are listed. About 9,000 miles per day, about 1,500 routes per day. In terms of our transportation, you can see how it's broken down: elementary, high, charter, and non-public. Question 3 in the packet gives you the detail by school. So it will tell you how many kids are transported by school. Also, we were asked what's the number of students who are transported by bus. That is a lot of lengthy information that we could not put in a PowerPoint slide. So that's also in your packet under question number 3. Start times for elementary schools. We thought it was important for you to know what are the start times of our elementary schools. So we have at least two routes that are running for our schools later schools as well as earlier schools. That information is all captured under question number 1. That packet is an entire list of all of our elementary schools. The high school information is right here in the PowerPoint presentation. There are a lot fewer of those, so we felt we could put those on a slide for you. So here's a really interesting part of the entire work. Sarah Oliver will be able to come and talk about where our kids live and where they are being transported to across the district. And so I invite Sarah to come forward at this time.
So good afternoon. I do have some geovisual information to present tonight to help inform the Transportation Summit. Let's see, I'm clicking. Oh, where's the clicker? Thank you. Okay, so first of all, we have a visual demonstration of our school attendance boundaries. We have 32 school attendance boundaries in our district. Those correspond to the elementary neighborhood schools. So the magnet schools that only have a magnet program do not have a boundary, and our high schools do not have attendance boundaries. This is a map indicating, again, all of our school locations, but then also indicating which of our school locations have preschools. The yellow highlighted schools are community learning centers, and we've also added an indication of which schools have school-based health centers. And these are in your packet as well. This is a map indicating where our magnet school locations are. So the magnet schools in blue serve the west area, the pink are the east area, and the green are citywide magnet schools. So I know you can't read this. It's okay. I'm going to explain. You do have these full reports in your packets, though. So we do have a new recent analysis called a live-in attend analysis that analyzes where our students attend, which is down the left-hand side, versus where they live, which is listed across the top. So what we're looking at in this report is, if you look at this central greenish line down the diagonal there, those are indicating the number of students that both they attend the school where they live. They attend the school for the boundary where they live. And I should preface, this is K-6 for this particular analysis on this page, K to 6 only. So if you so down that center diagonal is they live in where they attend. So if you look at that top triangle in the upper right-hand corner and the bottom triangle in the bottom left, those are students who attend neighborhood schools that are where they don't live in that boundary. So just to add it up for you, because I know you can't, I know. I did add it up for you. So there are about 1,800 K to 6 students who attend a neighborhood school that is not the neighborhood school where they live, which represents 18% of all K-6 students that attend neighborhood schools. That bottom section of this report are our magnet schools. And if you add in the magnet schools attendance, we're at 47% of our K-6 students do not attend their neighborhood school where they live the closest to. And I should go back and say the reasons we have 1,800 students who attend neighborhood schools that are not the neighborhood boundary they live in are primarily specialized units for students with disabilities and foster and homeless children. So this is representing 7 through 12 students. So as you know, our high schools do not have attendance boundaries, and so you can see how many attendance boundaries all of our high schools are pulling from, okay? So we have 32 attendance boundaries. Walnut has students from 32 attendance boundaries. SCPA has students from 32, but even Aiken has what you might think is more proximity-based, has students from 31 attendance boundaries. Yes. And you also have corresponding maps, I believe, in your packets showing the geovisual indication of where the students live for each high school. So at this time, I'm going to actually ask Mr. Thomas Gray to come up. He is a member of our transportation department, and we wanted to share with you very briefly a couple of technology advances that we have made and are making to help inform this transportation summit.
Good afternoon. I don't think I need a mic, but we have implemented on-screen, which is the GPS tracking system for our buses. It's working in conjunction with Versatrans, which is what we use for our routing platform. We can get in as a web-based platform, so all of our schools, vendors, and transportation department will be using this to track our timing and location of our buses whenever need be. We can get in the system, we can choose, we have grouped pretty much every school inside of the system. We're going to use Mount Airy as our focus today. So we have 3 buses out here right now that we can see. If we click, or a school gets in there and they click on a bus, usually it works, there it is. It'll bring up the GPS information, and we can click on the vehicle details, and it'll give us actual detail of what that bus has done on that particular day or any day that the GPS is up and running. So this bus has completed a route. We can click on that route number. Oh, why did it jump? Okay. This particular school is Phoenix. So bus 518 has ran this route. It'll tell us the actual stops that it made, when the door opened, when it closed, and when it actually hits each and every stop. Down here in the actual map area, there is a play button. If we hit that, it'll actually play what that bus actually did on that particular route. When it gets to a stop, down in the bottom area down here, it'll show the stop, when it stopped, arm open and arm closed. It gives us the speed of the bus, and we can slow this down or speed it up however we feel whenever we need to track that particular asset. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. So as Thomas said, on-screen is a new system that Thomas and the team have been working on implementing over the past few months. It is a system that works in conjunction with Versatrans. And we also are moving forward with piloting the parent mobile app that goes along with on-screen, which would then allow not only staff, but parents to actually see the real-time GPS location of the bus and the expected arrival time. It's called My Stop. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. So you can imagine with the information that Sarah presented in terms of where kids live and where they go to school, this has huge implications in terms of costs. And so you can see what has been the budget for the transportation department over the last 4 years. This is all inclusive. So that $43 million would also not just include the vendors, but fuel as well as the staffing here at central office to support transportation. This information is in your packet. Also in your packet is the breakdown of the cost by vendor. So you can see that's a different number. It's $35 million. That's a different than the 43 because the 43 includes staffing here as well as fuel and other costs as well. So this is just the vendor information. And we've itemized it by public charter, parochial, special education, foster, cross district. That's in your packet. Students with disabilities, the transportation cost for that is approximately $12 million, with extracurricular coming in at 1.1. And we have that detail in your packet as well. So there was a question that was asked, how much is actually outsourced? We actually outsource all of transportation with the exception of the staff here at central office. So the transportation in terms of busing, the customer service, the technology, the routing, the fuel is all outsourced. We just hired a director. We have 1 supervisor, 6 routers, 2 clerical, 1 accountant, and 1 IT person. So a question was asked, well, what if we brought this all in-house? How much would that cost? So we would need all of that staffing there, and additional staff here at central office to be able to support. See, we need a fleet, we need garages, we need parking lots, maintenance, people to do the maintenance, additional central office administration as well, and drivers. And our estimate is about 430 employees and about $200 million to bring all of it in-house. That's an estimate. Actual contracts. We were asked a question about what are our requirements in terms of contracts, and so within your packet under question 11, you'll see the documentation as it relates to liquidated damages. At what point can we actually charge liquidated damages in terms of buses that are late, or if drivers are rude or not courteous? There are actually things that we can do about that that are within our contracts. Bus discipline, there's far too much detail to put on a PowerPoint screen, but it's in your packet as well by school, by route. And then we were asked some questions about safety, and that's also within your packet. Council of Great City Schools, who we work with to quite honestly get information regarding urban districts across the nation. There was a question that was asked about what do they actually look at, and so we looked up the KPIs, the key performance indicators for the Council of Great City Schools, and these are the actual things that they measure, which are on the scorecard for the district. So at this point in time, Scott Adams, our Chief Operating Officer, is going to talk to you about the performance of our bus companies, and will provide the information for the chart that is in the very front of your packet.
These questions really came from a set of questions that Mr. Morawski gave me, and so we're trying to address those. So I won't read off every answer, but I'll show you what we're going through here. How is performance tracked? Right now, we've investigated and worked with all the vendors to try to start having daily reports that are sent to us about on-time performance by route, by bus, and we're receiving that information. We're still working with them to perfect it and use it more. You can notice about up at the top that First has about 60% of our business. Queen City, this is yellow buses, 33. Peterman at about 7%. UTS right now has 100% of the special needs and van type service, and then Metro has 100% of the high schools and things. How is customer satisfaction tracked? Each company does a little bit different. Most of the yellow bus companies do an annual type of survey that they go out and get feedback. UTS does have a more elaborate system. They do about 4,000 surveys a week to all their clients out, and then they evaluate that data and make adjustments where necessary. And then Metro does every 3 years, kind of does a survey on theirs. Can we see the call center, what kind of call center data and things that they have? First Student has a pretty elaborate call center data system, and they share that with us daily. Queen City and Peterman both have call centers, but they don't have a system that generates reports like the First does. UTS also has a pretty elaborate system, but they can't isolate just CPS business like First Student can, and Metro has their system, again, for their whole citywide system. This is a copy of just one day's performance. It may actually be it's just 1 day's of a report that First Student sends us daily. And that's it. All this is in your packet. This is the chart that we're using to track on-time performance by each company. You can see we just started, that's about a month and a half's work that we're putting in there. And so we're watching that and working closely with them to see how we can bring improvement to that. Some of the other questions that related to more human resources, like how much are bus drivers paid? Pretty much, you know, they all start out around $16, $17, $18 an hour, and then they average out about that for the drivers of the yellow bus. UTS is a little bit different because they don't have to have CTL, but on their CDL license, they're at the same rate. And then Metro is a little different because it's a city-owned or government type situation. The benefits, most of the companies, because they're not really 40 hours a week full-time employment, do offer benefits, but it's mostly the employees pay for it themselves. Except again for Metro, since it's a regular steady 40-hour work week in a government. One of the questions is that, you know, the companies pay for the CDL license. It's thousands of dollars. It takes a long time to get those people through in the process. And then once they get it, they can just turn around and leave. And so the question was there any way to have some agreement to keep them? And there's really not a lot you can do. There are some things in place, but they're extremely difficult to enforce. And then even if you win a decision, getting the money back is really difficult. The other questions that Mr. Morawski had on there that really didn't relate to the companies giving us answers were just kind of general to us. Are there other vendors in the area? No, I believe we're working with all the vendors that can handle the capacity to work with us. How do we track parent satisfaction? This is an opportunity for us to find a better way to track that and get that feedback from our parents. What's the district streamlined? The same way, it's another challenge for us to try to get this system set up to get that kind of feedback consistently. And have we tapped into TQL for logistics? And the answer is yes. We've reached out. They have a representative that's part of our task force. Yes. And so this is just a little snapshot of what additional things we're trying to do to bring improvements and see what we can do here. So we're collecting data from different companies about what's out there, what kind of systems are out there, and the best practices of other districts around the country. We have created a task force to bring people from different aspects that are involved to see about driving solutions. We meet about every other week. We've been meeting for about 3 sessions now and growing. We have activated on screen and hopefully to roll that out pretty soon. And we're also exploring other type of venues for that. We've talked with First Student, has their own system that's called First View that allows you to watch their whole system. It has a lot of nice features that go out to the parents. It sends them like, we'll be there in 10 minutes and gives them a cue of like the bus is on its way. And there's a lot of nice features about that also. One company we were working out with this RFID is a company called Wade and Garcia Associates out in Texas. I'll tell you a little bit more about them in the next slide, but it's got, we've had a video conference with them. We're speaking with them, and I think they'll be here in 2 weeks. They're coming to visit, and we're starting the process to get more about what their capabilities are and how we can use that. It does have a tracking system for the buses, but also tracking of students and staff inside the school. And I added another slide here at the very last. That's their logo. And what they are, they're a specialized solutions of identifying, monitoring, tracking, equipment or personnel. They've had implemented systems in multiple school districts across the country, and they can provide a complete monitoring system, including GPS tracking. So it's not only can they track the buses, but they also can track the students and faculty and things in the school. And there's so many things to go into, but with their smart tag, it's basically an identification tag that the students and all the employees would do. So for one benefit is attendance. When the students are in the school or in the class, the teachers can declare, and the attendance is immediate. During a lockdown situation, you can immediately see how many people are in the school and where they're located. They had this other thing that goes along with it. It's called Campus Pass, which is you can work with the software. So they're in a lockdown situation, all the doors can be locked, but anyone with a tag can get through the door and get in, but they'll immediately lock behind them. So there's a lot of security and safety issues that's very attractive to this. And a rough estimate right now is it costs $2 or $3 million to put it into all our schools and the Ed Center, but it's got just a lot of good safety and tracking and identifications that I think is very special and something we ought to look at. I think that's it.
So that completes our presentation. We have answered the questions and provided additional support to what the board has asked.
Do board members have questions or comments around any of the presentations? Ms. Bolton?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm glad we have arranged this summit, and I'm glad you had to get ready for the summit. And we have to do our homework now for this. Just a couple of questions. Much of what you were working through really dealt with the yellow bus piece as the, what is it called, on-site, on-screen? On-screen? Does on-screen only pertain to the yellow bus services, or how do we know what Metro is doing?
Yes, my understanding right now is on-screen is just for the yellow bus. It's connected to their GPS tracking system. I'm not sure if it could be hooked up to Metro, but they have their own tracking system that they have. I think it's called Metro Go or something, that they have their own app that you can already use and really already provide that.
Yes.
Could I ask too, we mentioned how many students we're transporting. The number of students we're transporting for high school, is that related to the number of bus cards, or do we actually have a way to count how many students are actually being transported via bus versus being dropped off or driving themselves?
It is actually how many students. We have identified what kind of cards they have, whether they use them or not. It's not being tracked, or that's not the number. We've actually identified the students and issued them cards and know what routes they're taking. And Metro has a routing system just like the others. So it's pretty accurate is what I'm trying to say.
And I'm glad to know that.
Okay.
That's new to me, because I thought we had bus cards, but we didn't necessarily know who was using the bus cards.
No,
or
we
whether-
actually, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
We actually do have a system to track that and been monitoring it. And after we started at the first of the year, by using that information, we got back with them and actually reduced our cost by $600,000 over our budgeted plan costs because of the way we're tracking those and the relationship we've had built with Metro and the schools and really working closely to monitor those usage.
So that high school for number, that number for high school students is not cards only. It is, there are 15,000
Yes, there's actually
high school
students
students
identified
getting
that
on the
are,
bus.
yes. Mhm.
Metro.
Yes, ma'am.
Clarifying question to that, and that, if I saw that correctly, that is including the charter and non-public as well, correct?
That's correct.
So that's why that looks so high.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm just glad that it's real people and not just the cards.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
So just following that, because I need a little more clarification. So we're tracking all of the kids in our district as well as those we transport for parochial charters and the cost, because we pay that cost.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And we do evaluate it and look at, are the cards being used or not? And if they're not being used, we take them back and.
And that is a
we-
legal requirement for us to pay for the cards for kids who are not part of the district.
My general understanding, I haven't read the contract or the law that much, but my general understanding is anything that we offer our students, we have to offer the same. It's got to be the same.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Follow up to that, I think we asked a meeting or two ago and gave an assignment to general counsel to review that law that requires us to offer the same service to charters and parochials and other schools. And I'm not begrudging that. What I'm concerned about is the same service that, how shall I say it? If that's all that we're required to do, then is it possible, and I know we've negotiated in and out with some of these places, some of these schools, is it possible then that we could also establish when they start and end their school day?
I'm not sure, but we'll find out. We'll get a legal opinion on that. I don't know the
I
answer to
mean,
that.
because their answers have been, no, you can't do that to us, and maybe one or two would do it. But again, the logistics piece of it, we don't want to offend people. The other piece is, if we're offering the same service, especially for those that might be for profit or even some of the charters, it would seem to me, I'm not sure why we have to assume the cost fully. Because it's a cost of us doing business, should be a cost for them doing business. But I look forward to General Counsel's careful and positive reading of that law to our benefit instead of necessarily everyone else's.
Yes, Ms. Bates.
Well, kind of back to that. I mean, can't we just give them the Metro passes and then tell them to work it out with Metro? Why do we have to do the routing for them? Because that would be treating them financially equal. Because our kids are at a disadvantage because they're using the Metro buses at times that we could be using to, have a better balance for our kids. So we're going above and beyond at the expense of serving our kids with, for instance, later start times because of that. If we can just give them the Metro passes and say, work it out, we may be meeting the letter of the law and not putting our own students at a disadvantage.
We'll look into that.
Yep.
Ms. Copeland Dansby.
Well, I think just like we're looking into that, there are probably several other things we can
Sure.
look into. I think you all do an amazing job with the routing and keeping up with all these little bodies all over the place. I'm more concerned with the numbers that I just learned about the students who live furthest away from their home school. And a comment in our opening from our board colleague over here who said how, why would people want to walk to their neighborhood school? So for me, my challenge has to do more with our students wanting to attend their neighborhood schools. I don't know if there's work that we can do around that. Of course, I know we're working on that, but the routing and, high school choice is different because we encourage our students to have choice, but then you're back to the Metro situation as relates to high school. So I think just in summary, I'm more questioning why our children aren't going to the schools in their neighborhoods. We've talked about that for a long time.
So we can investigate. We do know that in some instances, students will go outside of their neighborhood to attend another neighborhood school on a special transfer. Maybe it's that the babysitter or the childcare who support them after school lives in that area, and so that's where they go. There are instances where students need to be separated from other kids, and so they'll get a special transfer to a school. Or a student may start off in a school, move out of the neighborhood to another area, and want to remain at that school. Those are instances as well. In addition to the fact that we do have specialized students with disability units around the district in which students are leaving their neighborhood to go to a specialized unit somewhere else. And that's a good portion of those students. Isn't that correct, Sarah?
So too, with some of our students maybe want to go to another neighborhood school because of the choice in the curriculum at that school. For an example, if I live in Bond Hill, but I want art enrichment and I go to Chase, that could be a part of those numbers
could
as
be.
well. Okay. Yes, I would just like to drill down there. Also, as we talk about the later start times, there was a part in there that talked about the later start times, let me get this right, match more closely with a work day. And so I would like more information related to how later start times match closer with a work day, if I got that right. That was one of the benefits. And then I think we know the answer to the question about having our own fleet. Those numbers were outrageous. And where would we house them in the space and all that? And I don't know that you even included the cost for space in your numbers, garages and space and.
And you need multiple sites. because
And
if
it
you
would
go-
have to be multiple
Because
sites.
it saves money to have multiple sites versus build one. huge
So
site.
my question is that a $200 million increase or a $200 million price tag?
That's a really rough estimate.
Of a price tag.
Yes, of a price tag to buy the land, to build the buildings.
It would
to-
be much
yeah.
greater, I would probably
It
think.
probably is. I didn't want to throw some huge
Yeah.
number out there.
Thank you all. You've done some amazing work in answering our questions here, and I think we've opened the floor for a much more rigorous dialogue. We started this conversation, Ms. Bolton, and Mr. Messer and Mr. Borowski, because we were getting an absorbent number of concerns and complaints from our community that our students weren't reaching where they needed to go on time and all that. So I don't know if we're getting closer to solving that issue. I know all this information is important, but the crux of the matter still, I haven't heard, so.
Mr. Morosky.
I want to piggyback off a couple of things my colleague, Ms. Copeland-Dancy, said. I'll start with the neighborhood school piece, which I hadn't planned on really addressing, but something that I know we talk about in policy committee and student achievement committee. I think there's another issue besides the ones that were just mentioned, so I won't recap them. And that's the issue of our neighborhood lines. The work I do in my day job takes me to a lot of communities with families that have tough situations. And I hear repeatedly in the community woes of, well, my kid could go to that school that's right there, but I have to get on a bus and go way over there because of our sort of, pardon me, strange gerrymandered neighborhood school boundaries. So I think with our recent success with the Clifton Area Neighborhood School along real neighborhood lines, I think that's a conversation we may need to really have about, excuse me, I hear repeatedly, I'd love my kid to be able to walk to school, but they can't. I know all those other issues are real too, but I think that's one as well. That's a bigger conversation and it would cause a lot of heartburn, but I think it's something we should probably take seriously as far as looking at those neighborhood boundaries. So that was one thing. Another one was, one of the things I'm most interested in having this conversation, and everybody here knows this, or anyone who's tuned into our meetings, I have not received even remotely close the amount of communications from parents and constituents, complaints about anything remotely close to transportation. And I am the one who asked all the questions about performance metrics, call center times, and I really appreciate you, Scott, for putting this together, and I really appreciate all the vendors for providing this information. I'm just curious why I always hear no one answers the phone. I'm curious why the same buses are late. I'm curious why the same vendors have different drivers every single day. And so, and I appreciate a great deal that on the presentation it noted that we have a lot of work to do regarding the parents, and you and I have talked a lot, and kudos to you for all the work you've been putting into this, Scott, and I look forward to supporting our new director and the whole team. But we do need to figure out a way. Our parents in the community are the ears and eyes of this entire operation, not the vendors, not these metrics. It's the community, and we need to find a way to funnel the information in a productive manner to us, because we all get these emails. It's not unique to me. And the task force, I think, is a good start. I do. But the community are the ones who are going to help us get this right. And it's like, not to belabor the point, but like in my day job, I do work with transportation in the medical field too, and you hear from one set of people, you hear everything's terrible, and from the other set of people here, everything's fine. Neither one of them are true, I realize that. I'm not an idiot. But we need to get to that truth, and I think a siphoning in the community's input in a more productive way is gonna be the way to do it. So whatever that ends up looking like, I'm here to support,
Yes.
however we can do it. So that and the neighborhood boundaries, I really think we need to have a come to something about those.
Mr. Messer. Mr.
Okay,
Messer.
yes, I'll be quick. But, I think as a member of the Finance Committee, those numbers are big, and they're not shrinking, and neither is our projected student population. And so that obviously is something that we have to look at very seriously, and projecting that out what could that look like in 10 years? And, if we have no change to the state funding model, if we have no change to this and this and this, that could be a significant gap for the district over the next 5 years. That being said, my other committee, the Strategic Planning Committee, I think is probably the place where a lot of, in my opinion, the work has to happen, in that I think we have to make some decisions about what our future footprint will look like as we project populations, as we start to look at ourselves in the mirror about what schools cannot take any more children and which schools we may need to expand or add, et cetera, and then have a conversation about the schools that we have today and are we offering the right programs. I think there are some schools, and I am not the education expert by any means in this room, and I think somebody could probably help me probably better understand this, but as early on, I was trying to figure out the difference between a community school and a magnet school. And I could see some of the programs that we offer in some of our schools that I would say, well, that fit what I read online and tried to do the comparison. But then there were some of the other schools, frankly, like my school, that I wonder why that's a magnet, or why isn't College Hill also a magnet? And is that what serves the need best, or are these schools, do we need the magnets that create this movement? Because if you look at some of the distribution, I mean, we are pulling from everywhere. And frankly, the same thing goes in high schools. Not exactly the same thing, but areas where, if you're in this geography, this is your school, this is your school. And I think it's just the spread of where students come is just a significant cost. And so, I think whatever comes out of the strategic planning committee and looking at the future of education, the future of this district, the future of our population growth, and then ultimately what we think that footprint we will need to have to live into, given all of those components, I think then that, having transportation as a key enabler for whatever plan is to happen, I just think that's going to be an important foundation for the work that we've talked about today.
Ms. Bates?
Yeah, and it just kind of occurred to me that during the facilities master plan, we really consolidated so many of our schools. And we didn't do anything to the magnet schools. Magnet schools stayed put. And we reduced the number of neighborhood schools and consolidated for economy, for economic reasons and economy of scale reasons. So we could have, phys ed, art and music at all the schools, full-time instructors. But that probably added to the problem we have today, because now kids are coming from further distances, because in North Avondale, Burton isn't a school anymore. So, the kids are going to, South Avondale, or maybe even maybe even Rockdale. So it might make some sense to look at some of the magnet schools and see if it's predominantly people from the neighborhood who are using those schools. Why not consider a flip?
Ms. Bolton?
Yes, I think these are really the big issues, more than addressing how you guys are really working hard to address the specific issue of how the buses are running. We don't have that capacity necessarily to help you figure that out. But the reality is just what all my colleagues have said. This is really redesigning the district geographically and from a portfolio standpoint. Because even if you look at the end of the FMP, we've added, 6 schools since the end of the FMP. And during the FMP, you all had to get rid of how many? 20-some schools you had to close. And we have not addressed the new boundary lines that should be drawn based upon what we're doing and where we are now. The magnets help save the district. There's no question about it. It was a sociological and economic and political decision to have magnets as well as an educational one. But unfortunately, it created this concept that we have a two-tier system, which we're trying to make sure that's not the case any longer. But I do think and everybody knows this, I do think it's time to honor neighborhood boundaries before attendance boundaries. I really do. I think it makes sense if people are willing to live together, they might be willing to go to school together, versus whatever we've all done over the time as we needed to. But that's why I'm saying today is just the beginning of and the board's gonna have to make huge decisions, I think in a very short time frame, because you're creating another school with Mercy, you're doing all kinds of other things that we got cans, and that was historic to agree to use those neighborhood boundary lines for that new school. So I think program-wise, I'd like to drill down a little bit, especially on the high schools of choice, because I think where we see disproportionately the high schools are drawing really from their neighborhood. I'm not against going back to some concept of comprehensive neighborhood high schools that have feeder schools within them from the neighborhoods and whatever. And I think, too, you're going to have to build in some sort of additional choice at the high school as the superintendent's plan regarding going down the career path piece, because that's going to add choice if we're not careful. And the growth piece has to be done, everything we have to do has to figure in the transportation, because to Chairman Messer's point, that line item can't exist and it cannot grow. It cannot grow beyond our capacity to have more students. And I think I would really encourage folks, especially board members, to look at whatever's in blue in this packet that you got, because the recommendations from there, with the great help from Later Starts folks and 4 different iterations of Student Achievement Committee members over the last 2 years, we dealt with a lot of those bigger issues that are impacting the transportation and how transportation can impact those bigger choices. And I think Mr. Messer's right. The Strategic Planning Committee has a very short time to reach some conclusions and help us, but it's the board, and only the board can make the big decisions right now. But we need to get ourselves knowledgeable enough to do so.
Okay, we kind of naturally moved into our open discussion, but I
What a
want.
surprise.
I know. There are a couple of points that I want to make before we move on, because we have only a few minutes left. But one is, and I think everybody kind of touched on it a little bit, but, we have a wonderful equity policy. And we've designed the district work around, in some ways, to strengthen, choice and all of that. And so all of this plays into, again, how we see things through the lens of equity. We have to keep that in mind. So I think that's pretty much what we're talking about. Secondly, it looks like we have at least 3 levels of activity and planning around this whole transportation issue. One being the task force, which is, I'm assuming, an internal look.
Yes.
Okay. Then we have you parallel that with this summit and the work of which is high-level stuff. And then we have the activity that follows that, which is our strategic planning. We have to make sure that those things parallel or come together somehow, so we're not all on the same page. So what is driving what is what we need to sort of figure out. So having said that, I think maybe this is the point where we talk about how do we move forward. I think we have enough information that we can kind of organize some of the major themes and ideas and thoughts that people have, including, Ms. Bolton, what you when you did your overview, I thought that was a good synopsis of some of the broader scope issues, so maybe we can bring that into it too. So my question is, how do we move forward? Yes.
I think we need to continue to have full board discussion about it, but I think certain items, I think every board member has to study what we've been given today.
Right.
And have some follow-up questions, and I think it would be okay if we follow bylaws and if we have questions to administration, if we just make sure that we all are copied with the question and the answer, that would at least expedite our learning curve. I think, too, it's very possible that some of the bigger items could be referred to board committees who may indeed have to meet perhaps more, because this time frame is very short, because I'm hearing things like this some of these things have to be decided as early as February and no later than the end of February, especially if you're talking about transportation or schools or different schools or late starts or what have you, and you want things in place. So I would say that some of this can be expedited by being sent to some board committees. I hesitate to ever use the word ad hoc again, so I'm not going to
We're
suggest
not doing
that.
it
Thank
ad
you,
hoc.
God. Thank you. So I
Okay.
think that's where the
Right.
real work of the board is supposed to be, is in committee anyway.
Yes, Mr. Messer.
I just wondered if we aligned on a couple of key questions or potential outcomes, and then ask the administration to say, what would you propose? You're the experts in the district, you've got the plans for the buildings, you've got our footprint, you know our capacities, you know our overcapacities. What would you do if you had a blank slate today? What would you do differently today than you did yesterday? And I would be interested in doing a little bit of scenario, because I do think that there are probably people in the administration that say, well, I would know what I'd do, and I'd kind of like to hear that, because I bet that some of the solutions exist right here in this room by people who've thought about this, but maybe not in a kind of a holistic way that it would be then presented. I would say that could be an efficient kind of initial step.
Other questions, comments, or suggestions for next steps? I think what I'm hearing is we've identified kind of some really broad areas and some really specific areas. And I think one of the things I'm hearing is that we want to make sure that we can organize and try to figure out kind of in, I don't know if we want to say order of priority, but particular areas where we might be able to expedite quickly what committees can do. Your suggestion for, let's go to administration and ask them, but we want to make sure they have all the information, including the questions that we may have as a follow-up. But then what we generated today, get that information to Phyllis, give it to them, and then let them have a chance to digest it and come back to us with some real broad scope ideas. We're not asking them to fix the problem, but I think it's important to ask them what their opinion is. They probably know a lot more about it certainly than I do, so, yeah. Does that sound like where we're going? Ms. Copeland Dansby?
I'd also like to include or fold the fantastic recommendation of allowing the administration to do their work in with the committee that you've put together.
The task force.
Task force that you've put together. I think that's why you put the task force together, was to help solve the
Yes,
problem.
and the plan is to hopefully to think outside the box and look at everything and say, here's the parameters we have to work within and address each one of those and identify because we do this costs us this much more, and here's the complications.
Yeah, and I think the big piece to that is what two folks at the table said. Ms. Bates, who has a great deal of information, past history about the facilities master plan and how the decisions were made to leave particular buildings and not others, and then couple that with how the lines are drawn and figure out, I mean, like really basic ground level thinking, I think, should be a part of the decision-making, problem solving. And I do expect you to solve the problem.
Ms. Bolton?
One thing, I think the task force needs to work on the actual delivery of service and improvement of service and re-envisioning the service. But the task force is not manned or womaned to rethink the district. That's not, I think, unless they can add to it or what have you. Those are big, big decisions beyond the.
Point of clarification.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't mean the task force solve those issues.
that.
I
Okay,
just
good.
mean take everything we've talked about tonight, as Mr. Messer suggested, and figure out where it lies. Some of it is with administration, some of it is with the task force, and then, of course, continued board and committee conversation.
And that's what I meant when I said parallel. We have to figure out how to integrate the work. Who's going to do, I mean, where things lie and who's addressing it as part of that.
Could I also ask this, just to make sure the superintendent and treasurer and whomever tell us the timeline for this decision, these multiple decisions, from a budget standpoint and a notification standpoint and a portfolio standpoint? I mean, at least I've heard February I'm not sure if that, I haven't heard that from the superintendent, I've only heard it from others. So is that the timeline that we're really looking for?
So our budgeting process should be winding up towards the end of February in terms of having identified the central office budgets. We're working on the schools right now. So we would have to take into account what decisions might impact next year's budget. That is, in a way, aside from trying to get some efficiencies right now. In place. I believe that we could come up with some recommendations or suggestions to offer to you. I would not say that, and we have talked about a lot of things extensively, I wouldn't say that many of those suggestions you would want to implement all of next year. Because, I mean, these are recommendations that would have major impact on the lives of families, a lot of families.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
Whoever, I don't know.
I'm just
who's
gonna be
first.
quick. I love that because I want to be challenged to be, because you may not just go all the way here, but if you don't know that, you might not in here. So that excites me. I think that could really get us to an exciting place. And I also agree, this should be it took a long way to get up to $44 million. Whatever plan, we chop off $2 or $3 million a year over 5 years. I mean, think about what that does to invest in other areas of the district. So I find that very exciting.
Mr. Morosky?
Not to add more things, because I assume these are already being talked about, and I know at least one of them is, but when we talk about the transportation, the neighborhood school lines, and the walking to school, we're also talking about pedestrian safety. And I know that we've been in touch with ODOT, correct? To start the conversations about looking at our district-wide safety plan. So to be a broken record on purpose, I think we need to do that as the whole district, not little pockets of the district. So if that can open up safe routes to school opportunities for local community members or just for us so we have a better idea. And then the second thing is, and I just wanted to say this before we broke tonight, regarding our partnership with Metro and regarding the $44 million, I think it behooves us to be a part of the conversations with Metro, who really is going to need some support from the community, similar to how we need support from the community. And as we look at our district and we look at how we're transporting people, I think there's a real opportunity for us to save money as Metro is built out. And if Metro has more support, then I think our line item can go down. Because you imagine if kids could just get to school because bus routes worked versus having to have dedicated routes. So I think that's an opportunity to look at and to be vigilant about as we go into next year, because those conversations are probably going to be front and center.
Yes, Superintendent.
So I would love to just be able to cite something that my colleague pointed out to me that was remiss of me. And that is the fact that the magnet process is already underway.
Yes.
So families have already begun that process, and so to change that for magnet schools would probably be quite difficult at this time.
So I think your point of saying we can't, there are things we just aren't going to be able to do next year is real. Thank you. Yes.
I would also say
we're over our time, so let's.
we don't have enough knowledge to make those decisions about magnets, so I think that's not even on the
Right.
table
Yes.
instantly.
So what I'm hearing, and before we close out, so we do want to gather this information. I heard clearly that we can identify ways to expedite the work. We want our administration to work on and digest all this information we're about to give. And how about we wait until you call me about, and we can set up a time frame for us to come back together based on your opportunity and the time you need to do the, work up the recommendation.
And we'll work as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, having no other business before us, meeting is adjourned.
I just saw some data. Cincinnati is growing 600% more than all the rest put together.
I heard that.
We've had 4,000 students, that's like 6 schools.
That's what, yeah, that's